When the plane's wheels touched down on Saudi soil, Elon Musk found himself in a silence unlike any he had ever known. Normally, when arriving in a new city, his mind overflowed with logistics, schedules, calculations of efficiency, but this time was different. From the very first breath, he sensed a kind of weight in the air, a presence, almost. Something invisible yet structured seemed to envelop the city. His traveling companion, Colin Quinn, was unusually quiet. For once, his jokes were subdued. Both men understood this was not going to be an ordinary trip. For Elon, religion had always been a question of data versus noise. He had spent a lifetime reducing problems to first principles. What is fact? What is assumption? What is distortion? Now he was walking into the oldest laboratory of all, Mecca. The first encounter was the adhan. The call to prayer rose from every direction, not as a performance, not as background sound, but as a vibration that seemed designed to recalibrate hearts. Elon felt it reverberate through his chest like a tuning fork. Colin's mouth fell slightly open. Neither spoke. Words would have been unnecessary. And then, the Kaaba. Elon had called many moments in his life unforgettable. The first Falcon rocket breaking Earth's gravity, the Tesla production line humming alive, the successful docking of Dragon at the ISS. Yet nothing compared to that first sight of the Kaaba, a simple black cube, austere, undecorated, and yet its presence radiated like the center of the universe. He stood among hundreds of thousands of pilgrims. They moved in unison, orbiting the cube like celestial bodies locked in gravity. No software, no algorithm could sustain such flawless coordination for over a millennium. Here were millions of strangers, different tongues, different continents, surrendering to a singular rhythm. Elon's engineer's mind instantly made comparisons, electrons revolving around a nucleus, planets around their stars. But here it was humanity itself, aligned to something unseen. One man drew his attention, an elderly pilgrim leaning heavily on a cane, his steps slow and fragile. Through a translator, he explained that he had saved money for 43 years to be here. When he finally touched the cool marble, he wept openly. Elon watched, transfixed. No corporate triumph, no technological victory could replicate that depth of devotion. Back in the West, religion was often portrayed as control, rules, punishments, fear. But what Elon witnessed here was something else entirely. Yes, there was discipline. But it was discipline rooted in love, not fear. 5 times a day, millions stopped their lives, disconnected from commerce and chatter, and bowed, not as constraint but as liberation. Each pause was a reset, an intentional silence in the noise of existence. That night, in his hotel room, Elon lay awake replaying every detail, the Kaaba's stillness, the waves of voices, the tears of the old man, the vibration of the adhan, still humming in his ribs. And for the first time he thought perhaps humanity's greatest breakthrough is not rockets or AI. Perhaps it is the act of silencing the ego, and Mecca, he realized, was where that lesson had been perfected. The journey from Mecca to Medina felt less like a drive across land, and more like a transition between elements. If Mecca had burned like fire, intense, consuming, transformative, then Medina flowed like water, gentle, steady, soft, yet powerful. Elon Musk could sense it the moment he entered the city, a calmness that seemed to absorb noise, to quiet even the most restless mind. Medina was the city of the Prophet Muhammad, and at its heart stood Al-Masjid and Nabawi, the Prophet's mosque. Elon had stepped into countless monumental structures around the world, cathedrals, museums, research facilities. But this was different. Walking across the courtyard into the mosque wasn't entering a building, it was entering a living memory, a dimension woven from devotion. He sat quietly, observing. A boy, no older than 12, recited verses of the Quran to his father. But the remarkable part was the reversal. The father didn't know the verse. The son was teaching him. Elon thought of his own world, where knowledge usually flowed downward, engineers instructing interns, parents teaching children, scientists guiding students. Here, the current flowed upward, a child guiding a parent, It struck him as a profound symbol of humility and generational respect. Later, a professor sat beside him and spoke in measured words. "People think Islam is about control," the man said. "But true Islam is about surrender, not surrender to men, not to governments, but to truth itself, to justice, to the one who created us all. The ego is the real enemy." That sentence struck Elon like stage separation in a rocket launch, a clean break that allowed him to rise higher. Suddenly, the framework of everything he had seen made sense. Mecca had shown him unity and devotion. Medina was teaching him surrender. All of it was designed to dismantle the ego, the most destructive force in human history. Elon began noticing this in every detail. He saw an 18-year-old guiding a blind elder across the courtyard, patiently, step by step. He saw families sharing food with strangers, no hesitation, no expectation. He saw men polishing the shoes of the elderly, as if it were a privilege, not a burden. These were not staged acts for cameras or charity drives. There were no cameras. It was genuine. And in that authenticity, Elon recognized more strength than in any boardroom negotiation or industry award he had ever attended. Colin tried to break the heaviness with a joke about camel traffic and halal fast food, but even he couldn't sustain the humor. He finally leaned toward Elon and whispered, "It's like stepping into a place where God is real, and everyone knows it." Elon nodded slowly. It wasn't exaggeration. That was exactly the sensation. The difference between the two cities grew clearer in Elon's mind. Mecca was fire, burning away illusions, consuming the ego. Medina was water, soothing, healing, filling the void with gentleness. For a man who had built his life on speed, disruption, and acceleration, this slower, softer rhythm was revolutionary. Progress, he realized, wasn't always about going faster. Sometimes, it was about stopping long enough to feel the direction. One evening, sitting alone inside the mosque, Elon felt something unexpected. Tears filled his eyes, not because of sadness, but because of purity. For the first time in his life, he no longer felt like the center of the universe, and rather than shrinking him in shame, the realization liberated him. He felt small in a cosmic sense, like a single note in an infinite symphony. And in that smallness, he discovered expansion. Later that night, back at the hotel, Elon and Colin sat together in silence. No banter, no business talk, just stillness. After a long pause, Colin murmured, "It's like we got unplugged from the Matrix." Elon laughed softly, but he knew it was true. Something fundamental had been reset inside them both. Mecca had erased the noise. Medina had installed a new operating system. And for Elon Musk, it was the beginning of a different kind of experiment, one not with rockets or code, but with his own soul. Returning to Los Angeles after Mecca and Medina was like re-entry turbulence. Loud, chaotic, filled with friction. The desert silence had carved out a space in Elon Musk's mind, but the moment he was back in California, that stillness collided with the city's relentless noise. Billboards glared with neon promises, traffic pulsed like a swarm, and phones buzzed with endless notifications. It was all the same as before, but Elon now perceived it differently. What once felt like progress now resembled static. He sat in his studio one afternoon, staring at the microphone. For years that microphone had been a conduit. Through it, he shared visions of Mars, AI, and energy revolutions. But now he wondered, what am I really transmitting? Noise or signal? After watching millions of people pause their lives 5 times a day for prayer, he began to see that maybe discipline wasn't limitation, it was liberation. So Elon designed an experiment for himself. He carved out 5 intentional pauses each day, not rituals in the religious sense, but resets. 5 minutes at a time, no phone, no emails, no multitasking, just silence, reflection, breath. The results surprised him more than any launch data he had ever studied. Anxiety eased. Conversations with his children deepened. Even his responses in meetings shifted. Less reaction, more intention. It was as if he had finally installed dampers on the constant vibration inside his mind. He began to recognize patterns. Systems fail when noise overwhelms signal. The same was true of human beings. Prayer, he realized, was an ancient noise-filtering algorithm, refined across centuries. Not blind ritual, not superstition. Just structure. A human operating system designed for stability. Memories from the journey returned often. He thought of the young man guiding the blind elder, the families offering their last bread, the old man weeping as he touched marble. Those images played back in his head like data points of humility. In the West, accountability was enforced through contracts, laws, or reputation. But in Mecca and Medina, it seemed to come from within. People behaved as though every gesture was logged in a higher ledger. That inner awareness, Elon realized, created an integrity stronger than any external system. Then came Ramadan. Having glimpsed the rhythm of devotion, Elon decided to try fasting. It wasn't for publicity. He told no one outside his closest circle. From sunrise to sunset, no food, no water, no shortcuts. The first 3 days were brutal. Headaches pressed against his temples, his energy crashed, and his temper flared. But on the 4th day, something shifted. His body adjusted. Hunger stopped feeling like suffering, and started feeling like awareness. Breaking the fast each evening was its own revelation. A single date, a sip of water, things he had overlooked his entire life, suddenly tasted like miracles. Elon realized this was the point. Humans forget. They forget hunger, forget gratitude, forget the poor. Ramadan existed to strip away forgetfulness, to reset perception, not punishment, but devotion, not deprivation, but remembrance. He noticed other effects too. His dreams grew sharper, more vivid, like unclogged signals. They weren't random fragments anymore, but coherent sequences that carried meaning. He compared it to defragmenting a hard drive, old clutter cleared, leaving a cleaner, faster system. One night, Elon whispered to Colin, "This feels like a reset button for the soul." Colin, usually quick with sarcasm, only nodded in agreement. For Elon Musk, who had built his life chasing the stars, this earthly discipline revealed an unexpected truth. The greatest frontier might not lie in space, but within. Humanity's deepest code wasn't in machines, but in the heart. And now, for the first time, he was beginning to read it. The transformation that began in Mecca and Medina didn't stop with Elon Musk's professional reflections. It reached into the most personal corners of his life. Family, friendship, even the way he thought about mortality, all of it was recalibrated. Back home, he found himself looking at his children differently. He had always been present, yes, but not fully. His body was there, but his mind was orbiting somewhere else, calculating launch trajectories, financial models, engineering problems. Now he slowed down. One evening he watched his daughter draw with a pink marker directly on the table. The old Elon would have corrected her, explained responsibility, maybe scolded her. This time he simply smiled. He realized the point wasn't always to instruct or fix. It was sometimes just to witness, to be there. Presence itself was a gift. He thought of a saying he had heard in Medina, "Paradise lies at the feet of your mother." That struck him deeply. In a world that glorified billionaires, innovators, athletes, and influencers, here was a culture that placed motherhood at the very top of honor. It revealed a kind of wisdom Elon felt was missing in modern life. He began calling his own mother more, not out of obligation but gratitude, thanking her, recognizing her. He also reached out to old friends, some he hadn't spoken to in years, not because of anger, but because of ego. He picked up the phone, apologized without expectation, simply to release the weight. To his surprise, most responded with warmth. Elon realized how much love humans lose because of pride. How many relationships collapse under the weight of an unsaid "I'm sorry." Humility became the word echoing in his mind. Not staged humility for cameras or tweets. The real kind, the kind he felt in white Iram cloth, shoulder to shoulder with janitors, mechanics, and kings alike. That kind of humility changed a person's posture, tone, and presence. It softened without weakening. One night, sitting in his backyard under California's stars, Elon thought not of Mars, but of death. The question rose unbidden. What happens when I die? What meaning does all this have? Rockets, cars, fame, if my soul is uncalibrated? For the first time, he wasn't afraid. He even felt ready, not because he sought death, but because he was finally beginning to live truthfully. His mind returned to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whose life stories he had heard in Medina. They weren't tales of conquest or power, but of forgiveness, patience, service, and resilience. A man who buried his children with tears, yet still led his community. A man remembered not because of force, but because of character. Billions spoke his name every day with love, not fear. Elon began to understand why. That insight reframed leadership for him. True leadership wasn't about commanding others, it was about serving them. The prophet led by humility, by patience, by character. Elon saw that perhaps this was the kind of leadership the modern world was starving for. He also reflected on belief itself. He used to say, "Believe whatever you want, just don't force it on me." He still valued freedom, but now he saw another dimension. If you do choose to believe, believe deeply. Don't wear faith like a fashion trend that fades when it's inconvenient. Live it with your life, like the people he had seen praying with sincerity in Mecca and Medina. Even prayer itself took on new meaning for him. He no longer viewed it as obligation but as water for the soul. People didn't pray because they had to. They prayed because their spirits were thirsty. And that rhythm, 5 pauses each day, wasn't punishment. It was training, like lifting weights for the inner self. Elon began to adopt his own version, pausing, breathing, whispering gratitude. Not ritual for appearance, but a discipline for clarity. He noticed it changed his interactions, kinder with the barista who misspelled his name, softer with the Uber driver, more patient with his engineers. He began to wonder if perhaps each person in his path was placed there intentionally, as a test or a gift. And then there was the Quran. He had expected an ancient book filled with rigid commands. Instead he found rhythm, logic and poetry, bound together in a structure that spoke to both intellect and soul. One verse struck him deeply. Indeed, in the remembrance of God, hearts find rest. Elon paused over that line for a long time. For years he had chased stimulation, invention, expansion. Yet what he craved all along was rest for a restless mind. And there it was, spelled out in ancient words. By the time weeks had passed since his return, Elon Musk knew he was not the same man who had stepped off the plane in Saudi Arabia. Something permanent had shifted. The journey hadn't turned him into a preacher, nor had it erased his passion for rockets and technology. But it had layered something deeper beneath all of that, a kind of stillness, a recalibration of the human operating system. Back in Los Angeles, the contrast was impossible to ignore. The ads, the cars, the endless noise of the city, all of it now felt like static, compared to the resonance he had experienced in Mecca and Medina. Colin noticed it too. They would sometimes sit together in silence. No jokes, no business talk. One day Colin muttered, "It's like Mecca cleared the RAM, and Medina installed a new OS." Elon laughed at the metaphor, but he knew it was true. That was exactly how it felt. His life began to reflect this reset in subtle but powerful ways. He stopped multitasking, something he had once considered essential. Instead, he focused on one task at a time, fully present. 5 intentional pauses a day, even without ritual prayer, gave him more clarity than any productivity hack. His patience lengthened, his reactions softened, even his problem-solving seemed sharper, less clouded by ego. Generosity became another compass. The images of pilgrims giving away their last piece of bread, or teenagers guiding the elderly across courtyards, returned to him again and again. He realized generosity wasn't about how much you had, it was about how much of yourself you gave without expectation. He began asking himself with greater urgency, am I building for ego, or am I building for service? And then there was humility, the hardest lesson for a man so used to standing at the center of headlines. In the pilgrimage, every ego was stripped away by design. White cloth, bare feet, shoulder to shoulder with millions. No VIP lanes, no influence, no branding. Elon had never felt so anonymous, yet never so human. That realization stayed with him long after his return. One night, gazing at the stars above Los Angeles, Elon didn't think of Mars colonies or propulsion equations. He thought of mortality. What will all this mean? Rockets, wealth, fame, if my soul is uncalibrated? For the first time he wasn't afraid of death. He felt ready, not in the sense of seeking it, but in having finally begun to live aligned with something greater. He reflected again on the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, whose example had been repeated to him in Medina. Patience, forgiveness, humility, strength, without ego. Billions spoke his name with love daily, not because of force, but because of character. That, Elon realized, was leadership at its highest form, serving, not commanding. People began to ask him if he would convert. Elon's answer was complicated. It wasn't about labels anymore, it was about direction. Islam, he learned, literally meant surrender, and he understood now that surrender wasn't weakness, it was strength, the calibration of the heart to truth. For Elon Musk, the journey to Mecca and Medina was not a detour, it was a reset. He left quieter, more awake, more intentional. He came back seeing that truth doesn't scream, it whispers, and when you finally hear it, it changes everything. Even in the middle of Los Angeles noise, he could still feel it. A frequency humming inside him, a resonance that no traffic, no billboard, no algorithm could drown out. Mecca and Medina weren't just places, they were coordinates for the soul, and Elon knew he would carry that map forever.